A new beginning. Zoe Harper stood at the entrance of Crestwood Academy, feeling both excitement and trepidation wash over her as she gazed at the sprawling campus before her. The tall brick buildings exuded an air of prestige and opportunity, but for Zoe, they also loomed like giants ready to swallow her whole. She took a deep breath, adjusting the strap of her backpack, which felt heavier than usual, not just with books but with the weight of expectation. Her father had worked tirelessly to secure a spot for her at this elite institution, believing it would provide her with everything she needed to succeed in life. He had sacrificed so much for this moment. His pride was palpable as he dropped her off that morning, his eyes shining with hope as he reminded her to make the most of this opportunity. "Remember, Zoe," he had said, his voice warm yet firm, "you belong here just as much as anyone else." But as she stepped through the grand entrance, surrounded by students who seemed effortlessly confident and self-assured, doubt crept into her mind. Did she really belong here? The whispers and glances from some students made it clear that not everyone shared her father's belief. As she made her way to her first class, Zoe couldn't shake the feeling that she was an outsider looking in. The hallways buzzed with laughter and chatter, groups of friends gathered around lockers, sharing inside jokes that left Zoe feeling isolated. She tried to smile at a few classmates but was met with indifferent stares or quick glances away. When she entered Ms. Thompson's classroom for history class, Zoe felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Ms. Thompson was known for being strict but fair, at least that's what everyone said, but there was something about the way she looked at Zoe that made her uneasy. As students settled into their seats, Ms. Thompson began handing out syllabi while casting an assessing eye over the room. "Welcome to Crestwood Academy," she announced in a commanding voice that echoed off the walls. "I expect each of you to strive for excellence." Her gaze landed on Zoe momentarily before moving on. Zoe felt exposed under that scrutiny. As class progressed, Ms. Thompson called on students randomly to answer questions about their summer reading assignment. When she finally pointed at Zoe, who had been trying hard to blend into the background, Zoe's heart raced. "Zoe Harper," Ms. Thompson said sharply, "what did you think about the main character's motivations?" Zoe opened her mouth but found herself stumbling over words as all eyes turned toward her expectantly. I think, they were, her voice trailed off under the weight of their stares. "Speak up." Ms. Thompson snapped, clearly unimpressed by Zoe's hesitation. Zoe's cheeks flushed crimson as embarrassment washed over her like a cold wave. "I'm sorry," she mumbled, wishing she could disappear into thin air. Ms. Thompson merely raised an eyebrow before moving on to another student without offering any encouragement or support, a clear signal that Zoe had failed to meet expectations. The rest of the class passed in a blur of anxiety and self-doubt for Zoe. Each time Ms. Thompson called on someone else or made a comment about student participation, it felt like another jab at her already fragile confidence. When the bell finally rang, signaling the end of class, Zoe rushed out into the hallway where students were already flocking toward their next classes or socializing in groups. She navigated through them carefully, trying not to draw attention to herself as she made her way toward her locker. Just as she reached it, however, a group of girls brushed past her roughly, one of them elbowing Zoe intentionally as they laughed loudly among themselves. "Watch where you're going," one of them sneered without looking back. Zoe felt heat rise in her chest but swallowed hard instead of responding. Confrontation was never easy for her. She opened her locker quickly and grabbed what she needed before hurrying away from them, her heart racing not only from embarrassment but also from anger at how easily they dismissed her presence. Later that evening at home, Zoe sat across from her father at dinner, a warm meal he had prepared with love after a long day at work. He asked about school with genuine curiosity while she forced herself to respond positively despite feeling crushed inside. "It's great. I'm learning so much already," she lied through clenched teeth while pushing food around on her plate. Her father smiled widely and nodded enthusiastically about all the opportunities that lay ahead for his daughter, his pride evident in every word he spoke, but inside Zoe felt like an imposter in this new world where everyone seemed so effortlessly perfect while she struggled just to keep up. As days turned into weeks at Crestwood Academy, things didn't improve. If anything, they worsened as Ms. Thompson continued targeting Zoe during lessons while classmates began forming unspoken alliances against her. Whispers followed by laughter whenever she entered or exited classrooms became routine. Each day felt like another battle against invisible foes who thrived on making others feel small, a relentless cycle that left Zoe feeling exhausted both mentally and emotionally. By week 3, after yet another humiliating encounter where Ms. Thompson publicly criticized one of Zoe's assignments in front of everyone, pointing out every flaw without offering constructive feedback, she found herself standing alone in front of a bathroom mirror during lunch break staring at a reflection filled with uncertainty and sadness. "Why am I even here?" she whispered softly under breath while fighting back tears that threatened to spill over onto flushed cheeks. The girl staring back didn't look like someone who belonged anywhere, let alone an elite academy meant for future leaders. The bell rang signaling lunch was ending, but instead of returning back into hostile territory filled with judgmental gazes and whispers echoing behind closed doors, Zoe took one last look in that mirror before stepping out, determined not only to survive but also reclaim some semblance of strength within herself despite everything weighing down upon shoulders too small for such burdens alone. The weight of expectations. Lily Johnson sat at her desk, staring blankly at the group project instructions that Miss Harris had just handed out. The words blurred together as anxiety tightened its grip around her chest. She felt the weight of her classmates' expectations pressing down on her, and the thought of working with Sarah, a girl who had made her school life unbearable, sent a wave of dread through her. "Don't mess this up for me, okay?" Sarah's voice was dripping with condescension as she leaned closer, her smirk widening. "I can't afford to fail just because you're not prepared." Lily nodded silently, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The truth was, she was terrified. The last thing she wanted was to give Sarah another reason to ridicule her in front of their classmates. As they began discussing their project, Lily felt a familiar knot tighten in her stomach. Sarah dominated the conversation, tossing out ideas while Lily struggled to keep up. Each time Lily attempted to contribute, Sarah would cut her off with a dismissive wave of her hand or a sarcastic comment that made the other girls giggle. It was as if Sarah thrived on making Lily feel small and insignificant. "Why don't you just take notes?" Sarah suggested mockingly after Lily hesitated on an answer. "I mean, it's not like you have anything worthwhile to say." The laughter that followed felt like daggers piercing through Lily's already fragile self-esteem. She clenched her fists under the table, fighting back tears that threatened to spill over. It wasn't just Sarah, it was everyone, the whispers, the glances filled with judgment, and the feeling that she was an outsider in a world where she should have belonged. As the days turned into weeks, Lily found herself spiraling deeper into despair. Each morning brought a new wave of anxiety as she entered Crestwood Academy's imposing gates. The once exciting opportunity now felt like a prison sentence where every day was a battle against humiliation and isolation. At home, she wore a mask of normalcy for her father's sake. He would ask about school with genuine enthusiasm, his eyes sparkling with pride as he talked about all the opportunities that lay ahead for his daughter. But inside, Lily felt like she was crumbling under the pressure. She didn't want to disappoint him or let him know how much she was struggling. One evening during dinner, as they shared a meal together, Lily's father looked at her with concern etched across his face. "You've been awfully quiet lately," he remarked gently. "Is everything okay at school?" Lily forced a smile and nodded, pushing her food around on her plate. "Yeah, it's fine," she replied, though the lie tasted bitter in her mouth. Her father smiled back but didn't seem convinced. He continued to talk about his day, his work at the hospital and how proud he was of Lily for being accepted into such a prestigious school, but each word only deepened Lily's sense of guilt and despair. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she replayed the events of the day in her mind, Sarah's taunts, Miss Harris's cutting remarks, and the laughter that followed her every misstep. It felt like an endless cycle of torment that left her feeling drained and defeated. The next day brought another round of humiliation during their group project presentation. As they stood in front of the class, Sarah took center stage while Lily stood awkwardly off to the side. When it was time for Lily to speak, she could feel all eyes on her, the weight of their expectations suffocating. "Okay, Johnson," Sarah said with an exaggerated sigh as if Lily were an inconvenience. "Let's see if you can actually contribute something this time." Lily opened her mouth to speak but found herself frozen under the spotlight of judgmental stares. Her mind went blank as panic surged through her veins. I think," she stammered before trailing off into silence. Miss Harris raised an eyebrow at Lily's faltering confidence but said nothing. Instead, she turned to Sarah with an approving nod as if to say that this was exactly what she expected from them both. The presentation ended without incident. Sarah had carried them through it while Lily felt like a ghost haunting the edges of their project. As they returned to their seats, Sarah leaned over and whispered mockingly, "See? You really are useless." Lily felt hot tears prick at the corners of her eyes but blinked them away furiously. She wouldn't give Sarah the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Instead, she buried herself in her work for the rest of class, trying to drown out the laughter and whispers surrounding her. Days turned into weeks again as Lily continued to endure this relentless cycle of isolation and humiliation, each day blending into the next until they all felt like one long nightmare from which there was no escape. One afternoon after school ended, Lily found herself sitting alone on a bench outside while other students laughed and chatted excitedly as they left campus for various activities or home. She watched them enviously. They seemed so carefree while she felt trapped in a world where every moment was filled with anxiety. Just then, Mia, a girl from another grade who had always been kind to Lily, approached cautiously. "Hey," Mia said softly as she sat down beside Lily. "You okay? You've been looking really down lately." Lily forced a smile but couldn't hide the sadness in her eyes. "Yeah, just tired," she replied quietly. Mia studied her for a moment before speaking again. "You know you can talk to me if you ever need someone to listen," she offered gently. Lily hesitated but then felt something shift inside her, a flicker of hope that maybe not everyone saw her as an outsider after all. "It's just, school has been really hard," she admitted finally. Mia nodded understandingly and leaned closer as if sharing a secret between friends. "I get it," she said softly. "Sometimes it helps just to let it out." For the first time in weeks, Lily felt a sense of relief wash over her at having someone who understood, even if just a little bit, what she was going through. "I don't know how much longer I can take it," Lily confessed quietly as tears began to spill down her cheeks despite herself. Mia reached out and squeezed Lily's hand reassuringly. "You're stronger than you think," she encouraged gently. "And you don't have to face this alone." As they sat there together under the fading afternoon sun, two girls bound by shared experiences, Lily realized that maybe there was still hope beyond Crestwood Academy's walls. Perhaps there were people who would stand by her side against those who sought to tear her down. But deep down inside lingered fear, the fear that even with support from friends like Mia, things might never truly change unless someone stood up against Miss Harris and those who bullied her mercilessly each day. With renewed determination sparking within herself amid uncertainty ahead, perhaps it was time for Lily Johnson not only to fight back but also reclaim what little power remained within herself before it slipped away completely. The breaking point. Lily felt a familiar sense of dread wash over her as she faced Sarah, the girl who had made her life at Crestwood Academy a living nightmare. It was hard to believe that just a few weeks ago, she had been filled with hope and excitement about this prestigious school. Now, every day felt like an uphill battle against the relentless bullying and the cold indifference of her teacher, Miss Harris. "Let's just get this over with," Lily muttered under her breath, trying to muster some semblance of confidence. She knew that Sarah would take any opportunity to belittle her, but she was determined not to let her have that satisfaction today. As they began discussing their project, Sarah dominated the conversation, throwing out ideas with an air of superiority. Lily struggled to contribute, feeling the weight of Sarah's condescension pressing down on her. Every time she attempted to share her thoughts, Sarah would interrupt or roll her eyes dramatically, making it clear that she didn't value Lily's input. "Honestly, Lily, do you even know what you're talking about?" Sarah scoffed after Lily suggested a direction for their project. "I thought you were supposed to be smart since you got into this school." The laughter from their classmates echoed around them like a cruel symphony, and Lily felt her heart sink further into despair. She clenched her fists under the table, fighting back tears that threatened to spill over. How had it come to this? How had she gone from being excited about learning and making new friends to feeling utterly humiliated and alone? The project continued in this vein, Sarah taking the lead while Lily faded into the background. As they worked, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was watching them, judging her every move. The pressure mounted until it became unbearable. When it was finally time to present their project to the class, Lily felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She stood beside Sarah at the front of the room, trying to steady her breathing as she glanced at the faces staring back at her. Miss Harris sat at her desk with an unreadable expression, and for a moment, all Lily could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. "Let's start with our introduction," Sarah said confidently, stepping forward as if to take full control of the presentation. "Lily will handle that part." Lily's heart raced as she realized that Sarah intended to throw her under the bus again. "Wait," she began, but before she could finish her thought, Sarah shot her a glare that silenced any protest. "Lily?" Sarah prompted with an exaggerated smile that didn't reach her eyes. Feeling trapped and exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the classroom, Lily took a deep breath and began speaking. Her voice trembled as she recited their introduction, but she forced herself to keep going despite the growing sense of panic within her. Suddenly, Miss Harris interrupted. "Lily," she said sharply, "you need to speak up. We can barely hear you." The class erupted in snickers at Miss Harris's comment, and Lily felt heat rise in her cheeks as humiliation washed over her like a tidal wave. She tried to raise her voice but found herself faltering again under the weight of everyone's expectations. "Maybe if you practiced more instead of daydreaming," Sarah chimed in with a smirk, "you wouldn't have this problem." The laughter grew louder, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze as Lily stood there, frozen in place by shame and fear. It felt like every moment of torment she had endured since starting at Crestwood Academy culminated in this one instance where she was utterly powerless. In that instant, something inside Lily snapped. The pain and frustration bubbled up inside her like a volcano ready to erupt. She could no longer hold back the tears that filled her eyes as she looked around at the faces of her classmates, some smirking while others looked on with indifference. "Stop it," she shouted suddenly, surprising even herself with the forcefulness of her voice. "Just stop." The room fell silent, all eyes turned toward Lily in shock as she stood there trembling with emotion. For once, she didn't care about what anyone thought. She was tired of being pushed around and belittled by people who should have been supportive. "Lily," Miss Harris began cautiously but was cut off by Lily's outburst. "No. You don't get to treat me like this anymore." Lily exclaimed passionately, feeling empowered by the release of all those pent-up emotions. "I'm not going to let you or anyone else make me feel worthless." With those words hanging in the air like a challenge thrown down before them all, something shifted within the classroom atmosphere, a palpable tension replaced by surprise as students exchanged glances filled with uncertainty. Sarah looked taken aback for a moment before regaining composure. However, there was no mistaking the flicker of fear behind her bravado now. "You think you can just yell your way out of this?" she shot back defensively but lacked conviction. "I'm done being afraid," Lily replied firmly as tears streamed down her cheeks unbidden. They were tears not just from hurt but also from relief, the weight lifting slightly off shoulders too small for such burdens alone. Miss Harris finally stood up from behind her desk. There was an unusual softness in her gaze now, a hint of recognition perhaps? Lily, she said gently but firmly, let's take a moment here. As Miss Harris gestured for everyone to settle down, something unexpected happened. The other students began clapping slowly at first, then building into an overwhelming wave of support. It was as if they were acknowledging not just Lily's bravery but also their own complicity in allowing such behavior to go unchecked for far too long. Lily stood there stunned. It felt surreal, like waking up from a nightmare only to find herself surrounded by allies instead of enemies. "Thank you," she whispered through tears. It wasn't much, but it was enough, a small acknowledgement that perhaps things could change after all if only they dared stand together against injustice rather than remain silent witnesses. As class resumed, however, there remained an air of uncertainty, an unspoken agreement among them all that something had shifted within Crestwood Academy, a realization that bullying wouldn't be tolerated any longer, not against anyone regardless of their background or differences. And while challenges still lay ahead for Lily Johnson, today marked a turning point, a moment where courage blossomed amidst adversity, igniting hope for brighter days ahead. Finding strength. Lily sat across from Sarah in the dimly lit classroom, the tension between them palpable. The air felt thick with unspoken animosity as they began their group project. Lily's heart raced as she prepared to face another round of humiliation. She had hoped that working with Sarah would be different this time, that maybe they could find some common ground. But the moment Sarah opened her mouth, any hope evaporated. "Don't mess this up for me, okay?" Sarah said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I can't afford to fail just because you're not prepared." Lily nodded silently, forcing herself to take a deep breath. She was determined not to let Sarah's words get to her. She had been through too much already. But as they began discussing their project, it became clear that Sarah was not interested in collaboration. Instead, she dominated the conversation, dismissing Lily's ideas with a wave of her hand. "Let's just stick to my plan," Sarah said, rolling her eyes. "You can just take notes or something." The familiar feeling of inadequacy washed over Lily as she sat there, feeling small and insignificant. She had spent countless hours researching and preparing for this project, but it felt like none of it mattered. Every time she attempted to contribute, Sarah would cut her off or make a sarcastic comment that left Lily feeling even more defeated. As the days passed and the project progressed, Lily found herself increasingly frustrated. She wanted to stand up for herself and assert her ideas, but every time she opened her mouth, fear held her back. The memories of past humiliations flooded her mind, Miss Harris's cutting remarks, the laughter of her classmates, it all felt too overwhelming. One afternoon, after yet another heated exchange where Sarah belittled Lily's contributions in front of their classmates, something inside Lily shifted. She was tired of being pushed around and silenced by someone who clearly didn't care about her feelings or opinions. As she sat at her desk staring blankly at the project materials, a spark ignited within her. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered to herself, determination bubbling up from deep inside. That evening at home, Lily confided in Mia during a phone call, a friend who had always been supportive and understanding. "I don't know what to do anymore," Lily admitted, her voice shaky with emotion. "I feel so trapped." Mia listened patiently before responding. "You need to stand up for yourself, Lily. You're stronger than you think. Don't let them push you around." Lily took a deep breath as Mia's words sank in. Maybe it was time to stop hiding in the shadows and start fighting back, not just for herself but for everyone else who felt powerless like she did. The next day at school, as she walked through the halls filled with whispers and judgmental stares, Lily felt a newfound sense of resolve building within her. She entered Miss Harris's classroom with purpose, ready to confront whatever challenges lay ahead. During class that day, Miss Harris called on Lily again, this time to answer a question about their ongoing project. The familiar knot tightened in her stomach as all eyes turned toward her. However, instead of freezing like before, Lily took a deep breath and stood tall. "I believe the answer is," she began confidently, surprising even herself with how steady her voice sounded. As she spoke, Something shifted within the classroom atmosphere. Her classmates leaned forward slightly as if drawn in by an invisible force, and for the first time since starting at Crestwood Academy, Lily felt empowered. When Miss Harris interrupted with a disapproving tone, "That's not quite right," instead of retreating into silence, Lily met her gaze head-on. "I understand that I may not be perfect," she said firmly but respectfully. "But I'm trying my best and I'd appreciate some constructive feedback instead of constant criticism." The room fell silent. Students exchanged glances filled with surprise and admiration at Lily's unexpected boldness. Miss Harris seemed taken aback by the challenge but quickly regained composure. "Very well," she replied coolly but without the usual edge in her voice. "Let's see if you can improve." As class continued, there was an undeniable shift in dynamics. Lily felt lighter somehow, as if shedding layers of doubt that had weighed heavily on her for weeks. After class ended, Mia approached eagerly outside the door, her eyes sparkling with pride when she saw Lily emerge looking more confident than ever. "You did it!" Mia exclaimed excitedly. "I knew you could." Lily smiled genuinely for the first time in weeks. It felt liberating to finally speak up for herself, to refuse to be silenced any longer. Over the following days, that newfound strength began manifesting in other areas of Lily's life. She started participating more actively during discussions and even challenged Miss Harris when necessary without fear of repercussions. The teacher seemed taken aback by this change but slowly adjusted her approach toward Lily. However, while things improved academically, socially they remained complicated. Sarah still attempted to undermine Lily whenever possible, yet now when insults flew, they didn't sting quite as much because deep down inside, Lily knew who she was and what she was capable of achieving despite anyone else's opinion. One afternoon during lunch, while sitting with Mia and a few other friends who had begun rallying around her after witnessing how bravely she stood up against Miss Harris, they overheard Sarah whispering something derogatory about them from across the cafeteria table. "Look at them," Sarah sneered loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "They think they're so special just because they have each other." Instead of shrinking back or feeling ashamed, something snapped within Lily again. She turned toward Sarah boldly and called out across the room. "You know what? We are special. We support each other instead of tearing each other down like you do." The cafeteria fell silent as everyone turned their attention toward the confrontation unfolding before them, the tension palpable as students exchanged shocked glances at both girls standing their ground against each other. Sarah opened her mouth to retort but hesitated momentarily, perhaps realizing that this time there would be no easy victory over someone who refused to back down any longer. With newfound confidence coursing through her veins, Lily continued speaking passionately about kindness and support among peers while challenging those who chose cruelty instead. A ripple effect began spreading throughout Crestwood Academy as others joined in supporting one another rather than allowing bullies like Sarah continue unchecked. In that moment, surrounded by friends who believed in her strength alongside newfound allies rallying against injustice together, they created an atmosphere filled with hope, a promise that change was possible if only they dared stand united against adversity. As days turned into weeks again, while challenges still lay ahead for Lily Johnson, the journey toward reclaiming power over one's own narrative had begun, a story written not just by herself alone but also by those willing to fight alongside her against all odds. The fight for justice. Lily sat at her desk, staring blankly at the assignment in front of her. The words blurred together as her mind raced with anxiety. She had been paired with Sarah for a group project, and the thought filled her with dread. It was as if the universe had conspired against her, forcing her to confront the very person who had made her life a living hell at Crestwood Academy. "Don't mess this up for me, okay?" Sarah said, leaning back in her chair with an air of superiority. "I can't afford to fail just because you're not prepared." Lily forced a nod, trying to suppress the wave of frustration that threatened to spill over. She had spent countless hours researching and preparing for this project, but it felt like none of it mattered. Sarah's dismissive attitude only fueled Lily's determination to prove herself. As they began discussing their project, Lily took a deep breath and tried to assert herself. "I think we should focus on the impact of climate change on local ecosystems," she suggested, hoping to steer the conversation in a more productive direction. "Yeah, right," Sarah scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Like anyone cares about that. We should do something that actually gets us a good grade." Lily felt her heart sink as Sarah continued to undermine her ideas. It was as if every ounce of confidence she had managed to build up over the past few weeks was being stripped away in an instant. But this time, instead of retreating into silence, Lily decided enough was enough. "I've done my research," Lily said firmly, meeting Sarah's gaze head-on. "And I believe this topic is important. We can make a difference if we present it well." For a moment, surprise flickered across Sarah's face before she quickly masked it with disdain. "Whatever," she muttered, but Lily could see the tension in Sarah's posture, the way she clenched her fists under the table as if struggling to maintain control. As they continued working together, Lily found herself gaining momentum. She poured her heart into the project, determined to show not only Sarah but also Miss Harris and their classmates that she was capable of achieving something meaningful despite the obstacles she faced. However, the pressure mounted as they approached the presentation date. With each passing day, Lily felt the weight of expectations bearing down on her, not just from Sarah but from Miss Harris as well. The teacher had been particularly critical of Lily's contributions during class discussions, often using them as examples of what not to do. "Lily," Miss Harris had said one day during class, "if you want to succeed here, you need to put in more effort. This isn't just about showing up, it's about being prepared." Those words echoed in Lily's mind as she worked late into the night on their project. She couldn't afford to disappoint her father or herself any longer. She needed this presentation to be perfect. Finally, the day arrived for their presentation. As they stood in front of the class, Lily felt a mix of excitement and anxiety coursing through her veins. She glanced at Sarah, who wore an expression of indifference as if she didn't care whether they succeeded or failed. "Let's start with our introduction," Sarah said flatly, stepping forward as if taking full control of their presentation. Lily took a deep breath and prepared herself for what lay ahead. As they began speaking about their topic, the impact of climate change on local ecosystems, Lily found herself gaining confidence with each passing moment. When it was time for Lily to speak, she stepped forward and delivered her portion passionately. "Climate change is not just an abstract concept, it affects us all," she stated firmly, making eye contact with their classmates. "We have a responsibility to understand its impact on our environment and take action." As she spoke, she noticed some students leaning forward in their seats, engaged and interested in what she had to say. For the first time since starting at Crestwood Academy, Lily felt like she was being heard. However, just as she began to feel empowered by her words, Miss Harris interrupted with an icy tone. "Lily," she said sharply, "can you explain why this topic is relevant specifically to our community?" Lily hesitated for a moment. Doubt crept back in like an unwelcome shadow. But then she remembered all the late nights spent researching and preparing for this moment, the countless hours dedicated to proving herself not just to Miss Harris but also to everyone who had ever doubted her. "Absolutely," Lily replied confidently. "Our community is experiencing rising temperatures and increased flooding due to climate change. If we don't take action now, if we don't educate ourselves and advocate for change, we risk losing our natural resources and endangering future generations." The room fell silent as students absorbed her words. Even Sarah looked momentarily taken aback by Lily's conviction. When they finished their presentation, applause erupted throughout the classroom, a sound that filled Lily with warmth and validation after weeks of feeling small and insignificant among her peers. But just as relief washed over her, Miss Harris stood up again, this time with an expression that sent chills down Lily's spine. "While I appreciate your enthusiasm," Miss Harris began coldly, "I must remind you both that this is an academic institution where facts matter more than feelings." The applause faded as students exchanged confused glances, Some looked disappointed while others seemed unsure how to react. Your presentation lacked proper citations, Miss Harris continued relentlessly, and without those references, I cannot give you full credit. Lily felt heat rise in her cheeks as embarrassment washed over her once more. She had worked so hard only for it all to come crashing down in an instant because of one critical remark from someone who held so much power over them. But before she could spiral into despair again, something shifted within Lily. A spark ignited by frustration turned into determination once more. Miss Harris, Lily said boldly, surprising even herself at how steady her voice sounded despite everything swirling around inside her head right now, we can provide those citations if given a chance. The room fell silent again. Everyone turned toward Miss Harris, who seemed taken aback by this unexpected challenge thrown before them all. Very well, Miss Harris replied after what felt like an eternity, her tone still icy but perhaps slightly softened by recognition. You have until Friday to submit your sources. As class ended, students began filing out while whispers filled the air. Some congratulated Lily while others expressed disbelief at how brave she had been standing up against Miss Harris like that. In that moment, surrounded by friends who believed in her strength alongside newfound allies rallying against injustice together, they created an atmosphere filled with hope, a promise that change was possible if only they dared stand united against adversity. As days turned into weeks again, while challenges still lay ahead for Lily Johnson, the journey toward reclaiming power over one's own narrative had begun, a story written not just by herself alone but also by those willing to fight alongside her against all odds. With renewed determination sparking within herself amid uncertainty ahead, perhaps it was time for Lily Johnson not only to fight back but also reclaim some semblance of strength within herself despite everything weighing down upon shoulders too small for such burdens alone.